to a short little video about pivots. I'm going to talk about the differences between the traditional pivots and the Jackson zones. There are three main differences between these two pivot calculations. The first one is how we calculate the first support and resistance levels. The second is that the traditional pivot calculation that we work with over here at Licitrator includes a pivot range comprised of the main pivot, the central pivot, and the directional pivot, whereas the Jackson zones only has the main pivot to work with. And on the other hand, the Jackson zones has something that the traditional pivot calculation does not, namely Fibonacci ranges. And those are adjacent to the first and second support and resistance levels. So I'll show you how that looks in the chart in a little bit. So let's get straight to it. Let's start with the traditional pivot calculation. Let's go back here and see if we find a good example that we can work with. So yeah, let's take this one right here. We have a pivot range. As I mentioned, this is the pivot range comprised of the central, the main, and the directional pivot. And as you might know, the pivots are comprised of the high, low, and close of last session. So in this case, we're working with this high here, and then we take the low from down here, and you see this is in the electronically traded session. This here is the just at the open of the regular session, and we're using the entire session here to find the high and the low because we're working with the euro, and we often get the question, so what should you use for calculating these highs and lows? And we've just published a blog post on that, so you'll find a link to that below this video where I explain further whether to choose the highs and the lows of the entire session or the regular session, which is in a more condensed window. So okay, so we have the high and the low, and we have the close over here. You divide those by 3, and then you get the main pivot, which is in the middle here. And the central pivot you will find by just taking the high and the low and dividing by 2. So that's just straight in the middle of yesterday's trading range. And the directional pivot is found by wrapping, or to look at this distance between the central pivot and the main pivot, and then wrapping that around in the direction of where the momentum was going, and then we get the directional pivot here. So that's how we get at the pivot range. And this is a concept that was introduced by Mark Fisher in the Logical Trader. He was a floor trader for crude, and this book is famous for pivots. So if you want to do some further research into that, I can recommend that for further reading. Okay, so the other difference here that is between the traditional pivot calculation, which we see here, and the Jackson zones is how we calculate the first support and resistance levels. So to find the first resistance level, you simply take the distance from yesterday's low to today's pivot, and you place it above the pivot, and that's the first resistance level. For the first support level, we take the distance from yesterday's high to today's pivot. You place that below the pivot, and there you have the first support level. So very simple way of establishing support and resistance level taking into account where the pivot is in relation to the high and low points of yesterday. As for the second support and resistance levels, they are in symmetrical distance to the pivot. So in that case, we just take the entire difference between the high and the low, the distance, and you place this below or above the pivot. If you place it below, you get the second support level, as you see down here. And if you place it above, then you will have the first resistance level. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the calculation of the support and resistance levels here. Over here, you might wonder what this is. This is a pivot point projection, which you can activate in this indicator. So you can calculate where the pivot and the pivot support and resistance levels will be located in the next session. And so here you see we are at the very end of the session, and the price is sort of orienting itself towards this projection that we have for the next session. And you see the new session starts just above below the new pivot. So that's can be useful to have activated on your chart. And when you do that, you you also want to increase your right side margin here to about 400, and you do that by going into properties here, and then you choose 400 on right margin. So we'll find that in here. Okay, so now I will move on to the Jackson zones. Let's look at the same situation here. So I think let's go back here. This is it. Okay, and basically what we are working with here are symmetrical support and resistance areas. So as you see, there is an equal distance here from first support and first resistance level, and that is based on the range calculation of yesterday. So we just take the difference here from yesterday's high and yesterday's low, and you place it below or above the pivot, and then we have the second support or resistance levels. And if you have this, if you cut it in two, you have the 50%, and that is then the first support and resistance level. So it's just half the range of yesterday. That is the first support and resistance. And as I mentioned here in the beginning, we also have Fibonacci ranges, and that's the blue areas here that you see adjacent to the first support and resistance level. So here we have the 61.8 retracement, and that is towards the edge of the blue line here, so down here. And this then, of course, symmetrical to the upside. And then in extension to this, we also have the 138 Fibonacci range as measured from the main pivot. So that's something to keep in mind, and something that is different from the traditional pivot. Of course, you see also here there is no pivot range. It wouldn't make sense to have that the distances from the pivot. So you can work with the low and close and yesterday's high level in addition to the pivot levels here. Again, you also see a pivot projection here, and the last thing I will show you here is another neat feature, which is unique to our pivot indicators, and that is the capability to add rolling pivots. And you do that here. Show prior end day Jackson level. So we activate that to true, and then it's the rolling period in days. So we have the 3 days. That's a combination of the pivots. So the 3-day average of where the pivot has been for the last days, and well, you can use that as a trend filter. So if the market is trading above the 3-day rolling pivot, then it's a bull market, and if it's trading below, then it's a bear market. So that's basically it for this little video explaining the main differences between the traditional pivots and the Jackson zones. I hope this has been of value to you. And should you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us over at the contact form at lizardtrader.com. And you can also drop a comment here below, whichever you choose. We'll be happy to hear from you. Thanks again for checking in, and bye-bye.